Hi, Margot. Let's see if I can give you the ability. I don't know if you can hear me, but I think you're supposed to be able to. Oh, hi. Hello. Can you hear me? Oh gosh, I can't hear you. Let's see if I can unmute you. Hello. You're on mute. Can you unmute yourself? I think I can hear you now.
I think I can hear you too.
Yes! Yay! Awesome. Hi.
Good evening. Are you Emma?
I am Emma. Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course. Oh, there goes my alarm. Should shut that off. Okay. How are you this evening?
I am just fine, thank you. It's been one. You know how some days you enter the day anticipating one set of things and a completely different set of things arises, but
Yep.
many of them good.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's, I mean, you know, that can go one way or the other, so it's good that it went good.
And you're talking to us from home?
I am. I'm currently I'm in my brother's room because I'm a recent college grad, so I'm back at my home in Belmont, Massachusetts, and I share my room with my sister. So my brother's away at school, so I'm taking over his room. Oh,
yeah. Hence, authentic fan on the door.
I know. That's not me.
Yeah. How long have you been working at Belmont Books?
A little over a year now. I joined probably last September, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's been really nice. I now am a barista as well as a bookseller because we have a cafe, and so they're starting to train booksellers to make lattes. So it's pretty cool.
And I noticed that the shop has now reopened. I've been getting curbside delivery, but I realized when I went to pick up my last book that I could actually have come inside.
No worries. I mean, we fully, oh, here's Matt. We just opened like a few weeks ago, and now it's from 2 to 6 on Tuesday through Saturday.
Right.
Hello, Matthew. I don't know if you can hear me, but I have invited you to start your video, and you should be able to unmute yourself. Zoom is so weird. Hi.
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you. That's great. You can't hear us?
Oh.
Gosh. Oh, no. Can you still not hear anything? Oh. Uh-oh.
Hello?
Oh.
Can you hear us?
Oh, good. It's working
yes. Now. Okay, good.
Sorry, I had to change the settings.
No worries. That's why we're here early. So that Zoom is weird.
Tell me about it. I've been teaching. Margot, have you been teaching on Zoom? I've been teaching on Zoom the whole time.
I was teaching last term on Zoom, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And how is it going for you?
It's interesting. I usually end up kicked off by my internet at least once a class. So that's fun.
Great.
Yeah.
And what are your lovely children doing while you are teaching?
They are going to watch TV, so they're very excited about
So the more classes, the better.
Yes, yeah, they love whenever I'm on this thing.
Yeah, good. Um,
How are you?
I'm fine. I was going to ask Emma how they like to do the Q&A.
Sure. So it's really up to you guys. Sometimes people, authors will ask for me to keep track of it. Other times they'll like see something in the chat and acknowledge it themselves. So it's really whatever you guys want to do. I can come back when you guys feel that your conversation is kind of over and I can be like, okay, we've got some questions and I can read them off to you guys. Or you can, like I said, do you have the chat open? You know how to see the chat?
Um, yeah,
Yep. So on the bottom, there's the chat icon and it should open like a white window on
right.
the right. And so I'll send a little test thing. Hang on.
Okay. What do you think, Matt?
Sure, either way.
Yeah,
Sometimes it is nice to have somebody monitoring or something.
sure. I'm open to do whatever you guys are more comfortable with.
I think as we're in conversation
Mhm.
with each other, it might be easier if you were to moderate the questions, and that
Sure.
way we don't have to stare at the chat box.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
Focus on conversation, and then you can also exercise mild censorship if necessary.
true. Um, yeah, that's totally fine. So do you guys want to like do your conversation and then I'll pop in towards the end and do, okay, like we can do Q&A now?
Yes.
Sure.
We,
That works.
I think Matt is going to read, and then we're going to talk, and then I'm going to read, and then we're going to talk some more,
Sounds fantastic.
and then questions.
Yeah, that works.
Which we'll do our best to answer or blow off. Yeah.
So something else that we do is we ask the people coming in not to have their cameras on just because, you know, it can be distracting or whatever. But I've had authors ask for people to have their cameras on just because they like looking at people, but it's really up to you guys. So do you have, it was more of a like mandate that we had towards the beginning of this because of Zoom bombers. If you guys know about
Yeah.
that little, that
I
annoying
never
thing.
had that happen, but it did sound
Luckily,
interesting.
luckily we didn't either, but you know, we just wanted to take the precaution since, you know, you hear so many horror stories.
What is a Zoom bomber?
It was someone would come in and like be just doing something totally offensive for everyone to see and then like leave.
Right.
And it was just because at that point anyone could get into a meeting, whereas now we have like waiting rooms and all that. So
Okay.
you know, it's gotten better, but we still like to, just in case.
Yeah.
And are you guys okay with this meeting being recorded so that we can put it on our YouTube?
Yes.
Awesome.
Sure.
Oh yeah.
What do you think about seeing people versus not seeing people, Matt?
I like to see them just because
Sure.
otherwise it seems just, I don't know, they seem so disconnected otherwise.
Yeah, I understand that. Cool. I will.
But Margot, if you don't want to see them, that's totally fine.
I think mostly I like seeing people, but then sometimes people do things like yawn or leave or make phone calls when I feel I'm saying something absolutely riveting. So if I'm in your company, Matt, that won't be a problem.
You can also set it to, I don't know if you're on gallery view, but you can set it to speaker view so you only see who's talking and then you have like the little bar of people at the top of the screen.
Right. I might go back and forth between those two. So
Sure.
It's good to have options.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good. Any other questions before we start? I'm not going to let people in yet. We still have a few minutes. I just wanted to ask.
Yeah. I can't think of anything that I think. Yes, perhaps what time would you like the Q&A to start? Maybe.
Oh, I don't know. I don't want to hold you guys. Like, if you guys are having a great conversation, I don't want to come in and be like, stop. But, so our usual meetings are just an hour long.
Right.
So maybe if we could keep it to 45 minutes or something and then do 15 of Q&A.
Yeah.
Or if we have like only 2 questions, we can go longer on discussion.
Yeah, I mean, some of the events I've done, there have been really very few questions.
Yeah, it really depends on the crowd that comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're in a room with people, you can sort of encourage them to ask questions.
Yeah,
It's a
true.
little peculiar on Zoom. Don't you want to talk to me?
I know. I like to pop into the chat and be like, don't forget to ask questions.
Ooh,
Or if I see like,
move.
if I see there are no questions being asked, I'm like, hey, Margot, what do you think about this? It's just from me.
No, that's great.
And it encourages other people to be like, oh, right,
Yeah, no, I think that's really good.
Yeah. So we've got a few people in the waiting room. Won't let them in just yet, but that's good. And they're going to keep their audio off because you don't want them interrupting you guys. I think that one makes sense.
Yeah, that seems good.
Yeah.
No, I mean, when I was doing workshops and things, people mostly kept their audio off except when they were speaking, and when they didn't, it was quite disruptive.
Yeah.
But there's that like really awkward half a second lag, right? And you're like, is somebody gonna talk? Oh yes, okay, somebody is going to talk.
Yeah. No, it's
strange times.
How long silence seems on the radio or on Zoom. Suddenly 3 or 4 seconds seems like a long time.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. You feel
Seems
like that pressure to say something.
Class.
Oh, God.
So, how long were you affected by the big storm in Iowa, Matt?
2 weeks. Yeah, no power for 2 weeks.
Wow.
That's incredible. God.
It was a time with 2 kids. They did not like it. Neither did I.
Oh, that must have been so hard. Did you go to a hotel in Cedar Rapids?
We did. Yeah, we went to, well, no, because there were no, like, the hotels were full. So we had to go like all the way to the Quad Cities for hotel rooms. And yeah, we stayed there. I mean, they kept saying they liked hotels, but it's such a small space. It was clear they did not like it at all to me.
Yeah. Oh, 2 weeks. That sounds like an eternity.
It was a long
time.
And
the kids didn't even, they weren't like, yes, vacation. They were just kind of like, this stinks.
No, but afterward, for a little while, they were playing The Power Goes Out. Like, let's pretend the power is out. Oh, okay, now it's a game. All right.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and then there was also, it's also been incredibly hot recently, hasn't it, as well? Yeah.
Yeah, it just cooled down, but it was very hot while the power was out. It was, it would have been bearable, I guess, if it hadn't been so hot, but no air conditioning is no fun.
Oh, God. Oh, no.
Yeah. No, it just seemed like a terrible time.
Glad you're in Cambridge right now, Margot.
I'm in Cambridge, where, apparently it's been the hottest summer on record, and it's very dry, but nothing apocalyptic has happened yet.
Have you noticed the sky is a little pink?
I've noticed that it's
horrifying.
Yeah,
horrifying.
Oregon. Yeah. That's amazing.
Oh, all the way from Oregon? Wow.
Mm-hmm. They were like telling us on the local news the other night. They're like, yeah, the sky is pink because of the wildfires. And it's like, whoa, the fact that they could even, that there's like an air pocket going across the US.
Yeah.
Horrifying.
Yeah.
Airstreams.
Mm-hmm.
I missed Iowa, I guess. There's no haze here, luckily.
It's like only at night though, because like during the day it's blue skies, and then like you're looking outside at like dusk and it's kind of like it looks overcast, but it's got like a tinge of like pink to it. It's very weird.
Hmm.
Oh, we've got a good group of people in the waiting room. Can you guys see the chat message that I sent as well, saying hello?
I can see hello.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, just making sure, because sometimes people are like, I can't see the chat. I'm like, oh no.
I think that's just us three, but
It is. It is just
eventually I guess it'll be more. I like how it says everyone. Belmont Books to everyone.
I know. Well, you can send like private messages to people.
I'm going to type something now. I'm suddenly feeling left out.
My students send private messages to me in the middle of class while the rest of the class is like having a chat together. I'm like, what?
It's when I was doing, because I finished my final semester was this last spring semester. We didn't know, because Zoom was so new, we didn't know that like private chats got sent to like the host at the end. So I'd be like sending my friend, I'd be like, haha, I can't wait to eat dinner. And they'd be like, oh no.
Oh, I didn't know that happened either.
Well, I don't know. I think it's like in the files at the end. So I don't know if anyone even goes through that, but the fact that like we figured that out, we were like, oh no, what if I had said something really awful?
Now I'm gonna have to go through mine.
Yeah, now you gotta investigate.
Yeah, I want to know what they're saying.
All right, are you guys okay if I start letting people into the room? Okay. Yes. Oh, two of my coworkers are here. Hi, Susan. And Kathy's coming in as well.
Oh, good. Hello, Susan.
So they're saying hi. Hi, guys. Hi, Olivia.
Happy to see you both.
So yeah, so everyone just coming in, Margot and Matt would love to see your faces if you want to, so you can have your video on if you so desire, but if you're camera shy, that's fine as well. We just ask that you keep your audio off so that we don't disrupt the conversation. But yeah, we'll get started in a few minutes. We'll just let some more people trickle in and out. But yeah, excited to have you guys here. Thank you for coming. Kathy. All right, do we want to get started? Margot and Matt, are you guys ready?
Yeah, can people who come later still get in?
Yes, absolutely. I'm keeping an eye on the people coming in and out. So no worries. You don't even have to worry about it. I've got it. Matt, you know you're muted, right? Okay, good.
Did I unmute? Or,
no, you're totally fine. It's just sometimes the last event I hosted, they forgot to unmute themselves and we were staring at them just talking and not saying anything. All right, so hi everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to give my little spiel now before we get into the discussion. So thank you for joining us tonight for our event with Margot Livesey and Matt Sayalesis. My name is Emma, and I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books, located in Belmont, Massachusetts. And before we get started, a few housekeeping things. You can put that down. We just ask that my dad delivering my dinner. We just ask that you keep your audio off, and your video is fine to come on. Matt and Margot would love to see your shining faces. But I lost my place. I got distracted. We have a few events coming up virtually at Belmont Books, so let me tell you about those. Tomorrow, September 16th, Adam Smyer and Disha Filyaw will be here talking about their books. You can keep that to yourself, and The Secret Life of Church Ladies. And then on Wednesday, September 30th, Lydia Millay and Charlotte McConaughey will be here talking about their books, A Children's Bible and Migrations. And you can find out about these events and more at belmontbooks.com. You can also so we have a chat for this event, and you feel free to leave Matt or Margot any questions you might have in that chat, and we will come back to them towards the end of the discussion, and I'll pop back in and read them off. So about our lovely authors we have here today, we have Margot Livesey, who is a New York Times bestselling author of the novels The Flight of Gemma Hardy, The House on Fortune Street, Banishing Verona, Eva Moves the Furniture, The Missing World, Criminals, and Homework. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, Vogue, and The Atlantic, and she is the recipient of grants from both the National Empowerment of the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. The House on Fortune Street won the 2009 L.L. Winship/Penn New England Award. Born in Scotland, Livesey currently lives in the Boston area and is a professor of fiction at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And then Matt Salesis is the author of The 100-Year Flood, an Amazon bestseller and best book of September, an Adoptive Family's best book of 2015, a Million's most anticipated of 2015, and a best book of the season at BuzzFeed, Refinery 29, and Gawker, among others. He's also the author of I'm Not Saying, I'm Just Saying, and the nonfiction work Different Racisms on Stereotypes, the Individual, and the Asian American Masculinity. Adopted from Korea at age 2, Matt was named by BuzzFeed in 2015 as one of 32 essential Asian American writers. And now I will hand the discussion over to Margot and Matt. So thank you guys, and I will disappear now.
Appropriate enough. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Belmont
Hi,
Books.
everyone. Sorry, my internet is not the best. We only have 2 options here in Iowa, and they're both bad. So if I come back out, I'll hopefully come back right away. Should I just start reading? I was going to read a little bit, and then we were going to talk, and then Margot would read and talk a little more and answer some questions at the end, if that sounds good. My book, Disappear, Doppelganger, Disappear, is about a man who is kind of depressed, and yeah, it's got a nice cover, I think. And he, and he finds out that he has a doppelganger who's lived like a much better, at least by society's terms, like a much better and happier life than him. And the narrator believes that he is disappearing because everybody kind of ignores him, and many people have kind of left him and his life behind. And then he finds out that his doppelganger has actually disappeared. And so he wonders, why is this guy who seems much more successful disappeared when I'm still here? And that's really how it goes. So I'm gonna just read from the very beginning of the book. Actually, it starts with a list of historical disappearances, but I'll just read from the first chapter. One night, my girlfriend asked what was wrong with me, and I couldn't explain. We lay on my black sheets between my blank white walls on the bed that was the room's only furniture. We had bared ourselves. We had a connection when we were naked, but Sandra wanted more than full exposure. It was 3 a.m. after her late shift waiting tables at the cave, and she smelled like fry oil and strangers, and still she talked. Who was I to prefer silence? I told her how I blacked out as I watched the news, ate my microwave dinner, wrote, how I woke to find my status update a string of G's with no likes, nothing to account for the time between. It's not just loneliness, I said. I'm pretty sure I'm disappearing. People walk straight into me on the street. When I'm alone in a bathroom with 10 urinals, some white guy will come in and pee right next to me. She twitched her mouth from side to side. This was a habit I envied. She was always doing things equally on either side of her body. When her lips parted, the smack echoed off the empty walls. How long you been feeling like this? She asked. Like you're disappearing? I couldn't tell whether she was being sarcastic. Well, these were the facts. My cat was dead. My wife and daughter had left me. At some point in the last 3 years, I'd stopped going out or having friends. After the divorce, I kept the walls blank because the echo was a kind of company. Just to clarify, Sandra said, you felt like disappearing the whole time you've been with me? Just to clarify, I said, what I mean is, you're all I have left. Maybe you're the only reason I'm still here. I felt quite smart about this line. Try again, she said. Above us, the popcorn ceiling seemed about to shed its puffs. Okay, I said, today I went to the butcher shop for bulgogi. I stood in line thinking about how to tell the guy to slice it, and he served everyone else inside, and then every new person who came in. He didn't even look at me. Sandra held her finger in front of me, showing off a new burn on her fingertip. She must have gotten it from work that day. The ceiling blurred in the background. Tonight, she said, one white boy pinched my ass, and another tried to tuck his tip under my apron string. I would settle for no bulgogi. The room spun. After a while, I said, my daughter walked into the shop with her mom. They didn't see me either. I'm trying to tell you something, she said. All around us rose the smell of raw beef, the sound of chopping and flirting. A butcher shop was a place of zero subtlety. And then there was my daughter, with her lips purple and her hair spiked, and black leggings and silver boots and a camo t-shirt, like this was normal. Sandra sighed. You're in a rough patch, she said cruelly. You'll get out of it. I could tell she wanted to say something more. When she turned her head away, I thought, I had to look on the bright side. After all, in the scheme of things, disappearance was literally no thing, nothing. I was 36 and I was dating and my body still functioned, even if my left foot was slightly bigger than my right. I could afford $1,600 a month to rent the first floor of a duplex in a white Boston suburb. It could be worse, etc. Plus, I added, my agent called. She couldn't sell my novel. Plus, my savings are almost gone. You were right, I shouldn't have quit my job. Sandra sat up and let her hair down over her face like a ghost. Boo, she said. Don't try to blame me. You're depressed. Why were other people always telling me what I was? Anyway, she waved her hands in my face. Did you forget I went to City Hall today to change my name? I want you to say my name correctly when we're having sex. She had my full apprehension now. I'm done answering to two masters, she said. I mean, languages. I'd known of her plan to take one official name instead of one English name and one Korean. I just lost track of what day today was. Yumi? I said. Yumi brushed back her hair and the ghost shifted to her eyes. Do you feel like a single person now? I asked. I never felt like two people, Yumi said. It was only other people who acted like I was. I wondered whether what was wrong with me was that I was other people. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. It was so great to hear it in your voice. And one of the few things I love about the novel is all the puns, like Yumi becoming you, me. one of the many studied through these pages.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of puns.
So one of my questions was, you also write wonderful nonfiction. You have a craft book that's coming out quite soon, I think early next year, and maybe another book of essays. And do you feel yourself writing fiction in the shadow of your nonfiction? Do you hear yourself standing behind yourself saying, do this, don't do that?
Huh. No, that's interesting. I feel like a fiction writer, but I think at this point people read the nonfiction more, um, which is kind of baffling since a lot of the nonfiction is about how to write fiction. So I don't know. It's a strange position to be in, I think, and I feel like I know a lot of fiction writers who think of themselves as fiction writers, but who kind of get thought of uh, as nonfiction writers, and it's just an interesting phenomenon for me. I think Margot, because Margot was my thesis professor at Emerson when I was doing my MFA, and I remember a class where you talked about the differences between nonfiction and fiction, the different expectations there, and how you could use nonfiction expectations. I think this is still in your craft book too, um, to your advantage to like make fiction seem more like nonfiction. Or I assumed also you could do the same thing with fiction
Yeah.
techniques in nonfiction. And so I feel like I'm blurring the techniques all the time, but I do feel more like a fiction writer.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking more of maybe of my own quandary where, I sometimes feel my advice in the hidden machinery kind of resonating, and all the things I say,
Ah,
characters should do this and a scene should do that. And then, I'm writing my own fiction, wondering if I can in any way measure up to these wise and sensible things I've told people to do.
they are so wise. I love that book. It's funny. You set your own rules, and then you and then you feel like you have to follow them.
Yeah.
So you feel like there's a Margot standing behind you telling you what you should do.
Well, maybe because your disappear doppelganger disappear. I mean, it, there are a number of doublings in it, and even a tripling at one point. So I think that's why I'm thinking of myself as several people this evening.
Yeah.
So do people ask you about the list of dates at the beginning of the novel, the historical disappearances?
People do sometimes. I think usually just out of curiosity about what they are or like why I would include them. But one of the things I guess the Matt standing behind me says is right, that the novel is not without its context, and so I wanted to provide some of the context for the novel there at the beginning, so that I found from teaching Asian American literature and studies for a while now that a lot of Asian Americans and other people don't seem to know that much about, or to have been taught at least that much about Asian American history. And the book's disappearance is so much about Asian American identity that it felt really I felt like it would be better to kind of provide some of that context up front, even if people don't know what it is and have to kind of look it up if they get interested in it. Margot, I want to ask you about the context too for your book. Because I remember it takes place around the millennium change, and I remember I must have been like maybe a senior in high school when the millennium changed, and people were so afraid that everything was going to shut down. And it's a really interesting part of your book. How did you come to that time as like the point to set the novel?
Well, I realized at once that if I wanted to tell the story of the boy in the field, that I couldn't have everyone having a mobile phone, that things were just fall apart very rapidly. But I also thought there was something really interesting about 1999 at the time and in retrospect, because I think we thought something terrible was going to happen, that something dangerous was going to happen, and danger was coming, but we were looking in the wrong direction. And, you know, New Year's Eve passed that year with, I think, no particular emergencies. Like, I had friends in India who were going to call me to tell me what
If it
it's
is
like
happening.
in Mumbai, if anything terrible happened, you know. So I thought that had really interesting possibilities for the novel.
Yeah, it's like the threat is out there, but it's actually like people
Yeah.
themselves. Now we know that, I guess. Now we know it all too well.
Would you like to tell us the origin story of Disappear, Doppelganger Disappear?
Yes, sure. I'm going to turn that back on you in a second, but um, I started writing the book in 2012 or maybe the end of 2011. My daughter was born in June. I have two kids, and the older one was born in June 2011. And I'm adopted, and having my own child, like biological child, and seeing how different it was, um, how different, how different, like the construction of a person is. I don't know. Like I felt at that time, because I had grown up adopted, um, that we must just be like blank slates, and our parents, however they parent us, um, raise us to be who we are. And it clearly wasn't like that when my daughter was born. She just had like such a personality already. Um, and it really shook my understanding of like what a person is and how we come to be who we are. Um, and a lot of that kind of made it into the book. I started kind of with this guy who had lived my worst fears. I was really afraid, like at that time, that I would screw up my daughter in some way, or drive my family away in some way that I wouldn't really know until later. Um, just because it seemed like my trauma around family was like that. I didn't realize how upset I was, or like how much adoption was kind of on my mind until it was like really like crushingly on my mind. Um, and so I kind of was just writing into that fear and hoping that it would, I don't know, maybe I was hoping that it would just take me out of it. Um, and I ended up with this book, I guess. Well, a very different version of it.
Yeah.
How about for you, Margot?
Um, no, that's such an eloquent description, Matt. And the first Matt, who is Matt Kim as opposed to Matt Chung, first Matt in the novel, he is adopted at the age of, I think, 12.
Yeah, 12.
Yes, so that seemed even more traumatic in many ways. But the origin story of the boy in the field is a little bit different, although I too have questions around DNA and parents. I Soon after I published The Flight of Gemma Hardy, I had lunch with someone who had been at the boys' half of the school I attended, and I hadn't seen him in, I want to say something like 40 years, some scandalous amount of time. And we met in New York, and he told me how he had come home from school one sunny afternoon, and he lived in a tiny village, and there was no crime, and no one ever locked their doors. And he had found the body of a young woman who'd been killed by her boyfriend at the bottom of his garden. And that interested me, but what interested me even more was the way those 15 seconds, his life jumped onto a completely different track. It was like a huge fault line in his life, to quote your image of the earthquake.
Thanks.
Um, and everything else was different than he had hoped or expected. And that really caught my attention, the aftermath. And at the same time, I feel like there are a lot of books that begin with the body of a young woman, and I did not want to perpetuate what for me feels like something of a cliche at this point. So I very much determined that I would have the body of a young man, and he wouldn't be fatally injured. He would recover at least from his bodily injuries. So that was the sort of origin of The Boy in the Field. And then while I was writing it, I had decided one of the children would be adopted. But while I was writing it, I discovered, again, after a very long period of time, that contrary to what I believed, I had relatives. I had assumed, since my father died when I was 22, that I had no living relatives. And it turned out that I do. They just all happened to be in Australia. So I went to see them, and that was a huge shock to meet people who were related to me, whatever that means. I mean, and I kept trying to figure out what it meant.
That's amazing. That's wow. I mean, I remember reading like that, reading Even Moves the Furniture, and then hearing you talk about that, and thinking about the search for the mother, or not search for the mother, but the figure of the mother there, and in your own life too. The adoption in your story is so interesting to me, actually. I've been like dying to talk to you about this because I think it's fascinating too that I wrote about an adoptee because I'm an adoptee, but I didn't want to kind of totally run into my own experience. And I was thinking about age 12 as this kind of at the cusp of teenagerdom or whatever. And so there's a kind of a lot of play on the age of 12 there, and that another kind of fault line between younger child life and older child life, and how it seems to me like when I have met 12-year-olds, 10 to 12-year-olds, the tweens, that there are ways in which they're so adult, and then other ways that they're so childish at the same time, and it's a really interesting mix for me. And so I set the adoption kind of around then. But and then I've come across your book, the adoption is so young, and that's much more of actually the experience that I had. I was adopted when I was 2, and don't really remember anything about that time. And my brother and sister are both adopted, and they were adopted as babies. And your experience of, I mean, you have an adoptive family, and but that's a different experience too than kind of being adopted from birth. It's just really interesting to me how we can write these, because I mean, I'm rambling at this point, but the adopted experience in your book seems so kind of true to me and my own experience, and that I was kind of floored by how well you had represented it and really imagined it. And I was just wondering how did you do it? How do you do? I always wonder, like, how does Margot do this?
And of course, I have the same questions about how you do it. Well, I think one of the things is about my life is that I grew up on loving this neighboring family and eventually sort of forcing them to adopt me. So I was the one who was working on the adoption and making my way into another family. But of course, there's always a degree to which I'm slightly on the outside in certain respects. One of my nieces will be asking her mother about her hands, and her mother says, well, you have Granny's hands, and I have, etc. So those feelings play into it, but Duncan, the youngest of my three characters, does have, I think, a very happy relationship with his adopted family. Partly, he's adopted very young, when he's 2 or 3 days old, so he doesn't have other images, and in fact hasn't really paid attention until the day they find the boy in the field, when suddenly he thinks, oh, I had a birth mother. I had someone who came first, and begins to start his quest to find her.
Yeah, I feel like I had that same, even that's kind of realization, or like the realization that you actually have been thinking about something, but not realize that you were been thinking about it until something kind of jogs it loose. Um, and then I think too about the way that the family is so supportive, but also like sometimes says things that seem like totally what you would say in the moment, but also like could be really hurtful to Duncan, um, and like possibly, they say like like just normal things like you know, but you're still our kid, right? And you're still our brother and sister. Why would you want to do this? Um, that if I had heard as a child, which I did hear, um, it made me feel like I could never look for my birth family. But Duncan kind of like is so amazingly brave and pushes through that. And the family is very supportive as well, and it's like very complex and interesting. I think I'd love to hear you read now. I feel like that we should hear you read now, and then we can kind of go on.
Yeah, and I feel that I've hardly begun to speak about disappear, doppelganger, disappear, because from your amazing opening of Matt Kim feeling that he's disappearing, just so many more doublings follow, and such complicated questions about how we take up space in the world and how we act in our own worst interests. In his case, particularly his relationship with his daughter Charlotte is just so amazingly rendered. So I'm just going to read the opening page and a half of The Boy in the Field. And it's set in the countryside outside Oxford in England. The field. Here is what happened one Monday in the month of September in the last year of the last century. Matthew, Zoe, and Duncan Lang were on their way home from school. Usually they took the bus from the larger town where they attended secondary school to the smaller town where they lived. But that morning their father had said he had an errand to run and would collect them. So they waited beside the school gates and watched the bus depart. After 15 minutes, with no sign of the familiar car, they began to walk along the road that led to their town. They each wore a version of the school uniform, a white shirt, black trousers, and a black pullover. Expecting their father to appear at any moment, they walked fast, making it a game to see how far they could get before he pulled up beside them. They left the last houses behind. Hawthorn hedges and an occasional ash tree hid the fields that bordered the road. Through one gate, they saw a herd of cows, through another, rows of barley. The afternoon was warm and still. Only a few leaves fringed with brown hinted at autumn. Zoe was the one who spotted something through the hedge. She had a gift for finding things: birds' nests, their mother's calculator, a missing book, a secret. "What's that?" she demanded, stooping to peer through the tangled branches. The flash of red could have been poppies bordering the field, but the poppies had already lost their petals. Before her brothers could answer, she turned and ran back to the gate they had just passed. Matthew and Duncan watched her go. Zoe brought her knees high and pumped her arms. Last sports day, she had won the quarter mile by almost 3 seconds. As she reached the gate, Duncan, without a word, took off after her. A car sped by, the smooth engine noise undercut by a harsh rattle. Matthew looked at the sky, mostly blue with a fortress of cumulus clouds in the east, and gave up on being the responsible one who waited for their father. The two bags, his and Zoe's, banged against the metal bars of the gate as he climbed over and jumped down onto the rutted ground. The field had recently been harvested, and circular bales of straw lay randomly across the dull gold stubble. In the middle of the field stood a magnificent oak tree in full leaf. He caught up with first Duncan, then Zoe. From a distance, it was still possible to believe that the boy was asleep, lying on the grassy border between hedge and stubble. "Christ," whispered Zoe. The closer they got to him, the slower they walked. None of them spoke. Glinting bluebottles and smaller flies circled the boy. His hair was dark, his skin very pale. He wore a deep blue shirt, a color Duncan would later call cobalt, black shorts, and what appeared to be long red socks. At the local private school, the younger boys wore bright red knee socks, and for the briefest instant, Zoe thought, "Oh, he's in uniform." A few steps closer, and she grasped the nature of the red. His eyelids were pale with a delicate tracery of veins. Everything that happened, they all three later agreed, was only possible because of those closed eyelids. The boy's chest rose fractionally and fell fractionally. With no one to tell them what to feel, they did not cry out or exclaim. Zoe tiptoed forward, knelt down at a cautious distance, and leaned over to touch his bare arm where it emerged below his shirt sleeve. The boy's skin was reassuringly warm. He was a little older than her, 18, perhaps 19. "We need to get help," she said.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I always like, in workshop, maybe you didn't know this, but we always um, wish that we would have you reading our stories to us outside of class too, because they sounded so much better in your voice. When we heard you read them, we were like, wow, this is a much better story than I thought it was.
Oh, well, I always loved that part, reading your work and hearing everything you put on the page and accomplished. One question I had about Disappeared Doppelganger was whether it was influenced by your first novel, 100-Year Flood, was set mostly in Prague. And I wondered if Disappeared Doppelganger, had any of those European influences. I mean, of course, I thought of Kafka, and I also thought of more surreal writers like André Breton in France, for instance, or Harabel's Closely Watched Trains, or Bruno Schulz, The Street of Crocodiles. And I wondered if you were drawing on any of those writers.
I was drawing a little bit on some of them for sure. I feel Harabel is one of my favorite books, and Kafka always is kind of playing back there somewhere in my mind.
Yes.
I don't know, I wasn't thinking that directly about those influences that much, but it's interesting to think about it. There was that, what was it called? The new novel, like whatever that is in French, movement during like the 1960s, maybe, is that right?
Yeah.
I read a few of those books and really liked the kind of associative logic that was driving them.
Right.
So I was thinking of that a little bit.
Yeah.
What about you? What were the influences you were drawing from?
My literary influences were more to do with writers like Penelope Fitzgerald, particularly her beautiful novel, The Beginning of Spring, which is set in Russia, mostly in Russia in 1919. And then other compressed novels. I reread Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, for instance, and Willa Cather's My Mortal Enemy was another book I looked at, just to see how people compressed material, because I wanted to write something short, and I knew that would be hard work.
Yeah.
Um,
I love short novels. Like I can't get enough of the short novels. I was thinking a lot about when I started writing it, I had just gone on a long Murakami kick. And I had access to I was working at Harvard then, and I had access to the library. And so I was just reading all of these things I could get there. And at one point, for like 3 or 4 months, I just went through almost every Murakami novel. Um, and I kept thinking like, it's so much fun, but like, it's also, I wish that it was like in a different context and like with real characters other than the narrators. Um, and so I wanted to write kind of like a Asian American Murakami novel. But the thing I really liked about them was this question, I think that's kind of like going through a lot of the books, which is like everybody else looks at the narrator and thinks, what world are you living in? Because it seems to be a totally different world from the rest of us. And that was kind of what I wanted to capture of it for my book. The question of like, what is wrong with Matt? Uh, I think that's a good question to ask a character. What is wrong with you?
no, it's so interesting how you both destabilize and defamiliarize the world. And there's a wonderful moment. He's walking through Harvard Square, and there are men with red hats who have a kind of slightly sinister purpose, and he's convinced he's being followed to this club. And as a reader, you're convinced he's being followed, and you're convinced he's imagining it. And I loved how the world kept shifting for me, like one of those sort of duck rabbit puzzles that psychologists give.
Thank you. I was wondering, when you were creating these three characters, I guess kind of a similar vein, like what were the questions you were asking them, and how did you figure out how they would work together? Because they're both so individual, and yet also they seem like very nicely to work thematically as always with your books. So I was wondering how you came around to characterizing them.
Well, I wanted to show how the three siblings are part of a family. They sleep under the same roof, and yet their experience moment by moment is often very different. So when the boy in the field says a word, they all hear it. They each hear it differently.
Yeah, I love that.
And of course, they don't realize that they've heard it differently till much later. But for me, I wanted to show how each of them goes on a separate quest. How Matthew, the oldest, tries to make the world right again. He tries to find the boy's assailant and be like one of the detectives you read about in books, where everything gets solved. And Zoe, and he has a kind of guide in the figure of the actual detective. And then Duncan, the adopted brother, he has a guide in Lily who kind of helps to fortify him at certain moments and becomes this kind of presence in the family. And Zoe is, maybe her guide is her own sort of romantic sexual longing, her desire not to be a daughter and not to be a sister, to be just Zoe, and finding someone who will see her that way. Oh, have we lost Matt? Or, oh. Are you still there,
I'm
Matt?
sorry. I
That's okay.
am. I disappeared for a little while, but I was listening intently and really wanted to know answers that you were talking about guides. I
Yeah,
in particular really loved Lily as a guide. It
yeah.
was one of my favorite parts of the book.
Um, and one of the things I think soon we should turn to the audience for questions, but one of the things I particularly admired about your novel was the way it's pressed so close up against the present. So the instability and the defamiliarization really feel like it's mirroring what many of us are experiencing now on a daily and hourly basis as we look around us. That the world is changing in ways we never expected. And I think your novel does an amazing job of creating that both outside the characters and inside the characters in wonderful ways. Can Matt walk through walls? We're not quite sure. Are there really insects? We're not quite sure. Um, but it made it feel the novel feel very timely, in a wonderful way.
Yeah, there's that threat from outside. I think, like when I'm thinking about why it's so destabilized too, it's that like things are they feel very destabilized to me often, when I'm thinking about like how the outside force affects whether or not we can like tell what reality is. I'll often during this pandemic and when the power went out and so I was in the middle of this derecho and we had lost power for 2 weeks and we're living, in this very modern house that relies totally and completely on electricity and internet, and was suddenly like a box, right? It had like none of the functions that it was supposed to have, and I've been thinking since since the pandemic has started about how hard it is to tell like what reality is sometimes. I really do think that is a pretty common experience. Let's go to some of these questions though. Mine, because I dropped the call, my chat has kind of disappeared.
That's fine. I've got it all right here. So we've got some fantastic comments, all praising your work and how wonderful your books are. But let's look what questions there are. So Jessica Treadway wants to know, I'm curious how both conceive of their characters. From the inside out, do you start with a single trait like Duncan's precision in identifying colors, or do you imagine them physically first?
Um, it varies from character to character. In the case of Duncan, I really imagined him from the inside out. In the case of his older brother Matthew, I imagined him more from the outside in a certain kind of way. So I think one way or another, I feel that I have to somehow get both an outside and an inside for my character, but I search for that in different ways. What about you, Matt? Charlotte, for instance, is fantastically vivid. Um,
Thank you. Yeah, I guess for Charlotte, I did think somewhat of kind of the ways that she um, uses kind of her appearance to embody her personality, but and her resistance to like the norms that are forced upon her as a student and as a Asian woman. But I'm thinking, actually, because a bunch of my characters look exactly the same. Um, what delineates the character for me is often like, even though they're living in the same world or basically the same world, the world for a particular person or character seems like to be its own kind of difference. Um, and so I thought a lot about, right, like even though like Matt and Yumi are living in the same world, they're also like living in totally different worlds. Matt's is very strange compared to like what people think of as a normal life. And Yumi has kind of understood that there is no normal life and is trying to like construct some other kind of norm for herself within the strangeness. So they're kind of doing opposite things with this weird world that we live in, and they're like, and then their positions, right, are complicated by the differences in how they move through the world, genderedly and otherwise. So I think of it, I'm more on the kind of social level or something, being
Right.
in the world.
Yeah. So you're creating the characters in a society, as it were. In-
Yes, yeah. I think a lot of it for me is like how you move through life, and that depends so much on how other people are reading you in certain situations.
Yeah.
So another question. I was wondering, are either of you working on anything new? I know that your new books just came out in August, but you could be working on something. I don't know. And has the pandemic been affecting your writing habits at all, or the subject matter?
I'm
Matt?
I'll go first. I'm teaching a course on novel writing right now, so I'm actually doing the exercises along with my students. So I'm kind of working on something, though I'm trying to understand that it's been extremely hard for me to write during the pandemic, and it is for them too. So I've only required 1,000 words a week. So I've written about 3,000 words of like a K-drama-ish, very dramatic, supernatural romance for now. Um,
Sounds great.
yes, but I would love to hear, actually, if Margot, if it's working out for you, please tell me how to make it work.
Um, I was just when it became apparent in March that I was going to stay in Cambridge and teach my Iowa classes on Zoom. Um, I was, among other things, I was really irritated. But I also thought, I want to model for like you, I want to model for my students what I'm asking them to do, my wonderful graduate students. And I immediately in March started writing something that I think of as my COVID novel. And it enables me to go to Scotland every day, which may turn out to be its only virtue. But I have been writing quite persistently. And I'm very aware that many people I know who are involved in theater or music or sport or all kinds of people can't do the things they normally do. And I actually can. So I feel I have to try. And I don't have this term I'm not teaching, so I don't have the excuse.
Yeah, for some
Awesome.
reason I was like less able to write when I wasn't teaching. It's at least like if I'm making somebody else do it, I can feel at least like some responsibility for doing it myself.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
So Susan wants to know, can you both talk about your experience working with your editors? Do you have close relationships? Is that the person you count on most to do the polishing?
I've had the same editor since Eva Moves the Furniture. Um, and I think she's great. Um, she's very good at the big stuff, but she also does line edit, which is rather unusual, I think, nowadays. I will say, though, I don't count on her to do the polishing. When my first novel was published, I was so thrilled it was being published, and I thought it must be okay because someone's publishing it, and I don't need to worry anymore. And after it was published, I thought that wasn't entirely correct, and so I feel like it's up to me to do the polishing in the final analysis. What about you, Matt? Are you with the same editor as for 100-Year Flood?
It looks like we might have just lost Matt again. Oh no. Matt. He did say that internet has been cutting out, especially in the middle of class time.
And perhaps till he comes back, I could just take a moment to talk about what I've been reading and just do a quick shout out for a couple of books. My dear friend Randall Keenan's new collection, If I Had Two Wings, was published in August, and very sadly, Randall died a few weeks later, but he left us with just a ravishing collection. His voice is there on every page, and I really recommend it. And that quality is also true of Sarah Shunlian Bynum's collection, Likes. The Likes refers to a father who tries to get to know his daughter by seeing how many likes she has on Facebook. Anyway, two really beautiful collections of stories that I recommend. So I was just filling up the time till you came back.
Oh no, that's great. I'm sorry. Randall, was one of my first writing teachers. I went to UNC Chapel Hill as an undergrad, and he had just kind of, he was there on a visiting gig, and of course he was so amazing that they kept him there. But he was a really wonderful writer, person, teacher. Really was a really amazing influence on my life at that time. I was so sad to hear what happened. I was going to recommend a couple of books by Emersonians, since Margot and I have that connection. And a few people kind of were all coming out. All the books came out, I think, basically in July, August, September. And next month, it will just be devoted to the election, probably. So like books will be over. But Laura Vandenberg's wonderful collection came out, I Hold a Wolf by the Ears, and Elisa Gabbard's essay collection I really love. It's called The Unreality of Memory. Both are really smart and take on like kind of interestingly similar issues, but in totally different forms, and one fiction and one nonfiction. But it's fun to see like what the people you knew a long time ago are doing like with their writing now in the same kind of troubles in the world and in the same context.
I just want to say that I just finished my undergrad at Emerson.
Congratulations.
Right,
Thank you. No, I just wanted to say, I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know you guys had the Emerson connection. That's awesome. We've got another question. Oh, go ahead.
Matt was just about to tell us about his editor.
Oh yes,
You're
my
absolutely
editor.
Right. If you
Yes, my editor was my editor was switched kind of later in the process, but my original editor stayed on as long as she could to finish the book, and is amazing. Her name is Vivian Lee, but because of some complicated situations, ended up moving on. So I don't know. I think if you have an editor that you can kind of rely on for that, it's so wonderful. And Vivian was so helpful, and just kind of being a guide for the book, both like on the page and in the world. I think the world part is a part that I really have trouble with, that an editor sometimes can help a lot with.
Yeah.
All right. I think this might be our last question. We've got some wonderful comments which I can go through and read afterwards. But Margot, this is from Susan again. Margot, I loved the Salon of Second Chances. Is that a real event or completely from your imagination? And can we do that someday when the world is better?
I love that too.
It's entirely from my imagination at this point, but I would love to make it happen when times change again. I think that would be fantastic. You're all invited.
Yes. Awesome.
I've always wanted to be invited to Second Chances.
So we've got a bunch of very sweet comments. Let me see. if I can read them in a way that makes sense, because it's a lot of discussion between our audience members, which is very nice to see. Jessica Treadway says, we should all be so lucky as to have Margot standing behind us. Susan responds, agree, Jessica, both Margot and Matt are such good teachers. I've been lucky enough to take a workshop with Matt through Grub Street. I love this pairing, that there are questions about what it means to be part of a family in both novels. Kathy says, not a question but a comment. Boy in the Field was the first book I read after the onset of the pandemic in ARC form some months ago, in which I was able to immerse myself. I credit the sensitivity and finesse with which Margot handles the relationship of the characters. It was very nice. Everyone's so nice. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Jessica responds, absolutely, Kathy. I love The Boy in the Field for that reason. I haven't read Matt's book yet, but looking forward to it. Agree that this is a great pairing and the writers, pairing of writers for us to hear tonight. Let's see. Oh, Susan asks, Matt, do you think you can, or that it's possible to write your way to some kind of balance or resolution with your feelings about your adoption?
Resolution. I don't know if there's a resolution part of it, but I do think maybe balance is the word for it, but I feel like writing has helped me immensely, just as kind of, in some ways, any kind of storytelling that you can do to try to make sense of a person's place in the world probably is pretty helpful to like working through trauma. So I definitely think writing has helped a lot in that respect. It's also like, I think one thing that I really like about it is, and Margot, I want to hear too from you. It's like that, like one of the great things is it like pushes you to do research into these various things, and then the research can actually be like really helpful to you too. So there's a lot of kind of references to theories about free will and desire and stuff in the novel, and doing all of that research actually really helped me in life as well.
Yeah. No, if I wasn't writing a novel, I think I'd pretend to write one so that I could do research.
Yeah.
Because it is one of the things that really enlarges my life, often in ways that are quite unexpected.
Well, that's great. We've got one thing. Steve says, just discovered The Hidden Machinery, Margot's essays on writing. I'm now on her schedule, changed my life more than the pandemic.
It's so good. It is like having Margot standing behind you. Wonderful.
And you'll feel that even more, Steve, when you read Matt's wonderful craft book, which is coming out next February?
In January. Called Craft in the Real World.
Yes. So.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. We're getting some thank yous from our crowd. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming. This was a wonderful discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Belmont Books, for hosting this. You, Emma, and Susan, and Stacy, and Cassie, for giving our books a home in the world, and hopefully our books will, like good young people, leave home.
Of course, we love having you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you. Good night. Good night, Matt. So good to see you.
Good night, Margot. You too.